What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another brand new installment of Renegades Reviews, right here on the Casa D18 Studios channel. I am your host, the Renegade, JJ Williams, and today I'm going to be talking about Breakfast at Tiffany's from 1961, starring Audrey Hepburn as our main character, Holly Golightly, George Peppard, who would go on some 20 years later to be Hannibal on the A-Team, Mickey Rooney. I'm going to get to Mickey Rooney in a minute. Mr. Uniyoshi. Buddy Ebsen, who would begin playing Jed Clampett on the Beverly Hillbillies 1 year later. And Alan Reed, the voice of Fred Flintstone, believe it or not, in this film. Now, before I get into... No, wait. I'll do it after. The film begins one morning with the taxi cab pulling up in front of Tiffany & Co. And our main character, Holly Golightly, emerges from the taxi cab. She's dressed elegantly from her head to her toes, and she's carrying a paper bag with her breakfast inside of it. She looks at the window displays, and then she heads to her apartment. She's unable to find her key, so she buzzes the apartment building of Mr. Uniyoshi to let her in. Her date from the night before is still there, and she manages to get rid of him, and she goes to sleep. She's woken up later in the day, pretty much by the same way that she woke up Mr. Uniyoshi, with somebody buzzing her room to get in. And it's Paul Varjak, who is a new neighbor of hers. He's also an author. Now, for whatever reason, I don't remember if we really get it established or not. Holly always calls Paul Fred. Just calls him Fred. The two of them conversate for a few minutes, and Holly changes her clothes to go see Sally Tomato, who's a mobster in jail at Sing Sing. And Sally's lawyer gives Holly $100 a week to deliver the weather report. As Holly is leaving her apartment, she's introduced to Paul's decorator, an older, wealthy woman named Emily Eustace Phelanson, who Paul calls 2E. That evening, Holly is trying to evade an overeager date, and she goes to the fire escape. As she's on the fire escape, she peers into Paul's apartment, and she sees 2E leaving him money and giving him a kiss goodbye. Holly visits Paul a little bit later on, and this is when she discovers, and we discover, that he's an author. He's a writer. But he hasn't had anything published for about 5 years. Holly tells Paul that she's trying to save money to support her brother, Fred. And I think this is where the Fred thing comes in, is that it's the name of her brother, who's someone she cares about, so she ends up calling him Fred as well. And she's trying to save money to support her brother when he comes home from the army. The two fall asleep, but are awakened when Holly has a nightmare about her brother. When Paul begins to question Holly, she chastises him for it, prying into her business. Later on, Holly realizes, he was only trying to look out for her. So she feels bad, and she buys Paul some typewriter ribbon as an apology, and she invites him to a party at her apartment. It's supposed to be the big to-do, a Holly Golightly party. There's going to be everybody and anybody there. While at the party, Paul meets Holly's agent. who tells him about her transformation from being a country girl to a Manhattan socialite. Paul is also introduced to Jose, a Brazilian politician, and Rusty, who is the ninth richest man in the world under 50. The next day, feeling that she's being followed, 2E comes to Paul's apartment, and Paul tells her that he'll investigate. Ends up confronting a man who's revealed to be Doc Golightly, Holly's estranged husband. Now, Doc Golightly is Buddy Ebsen's character. Doc begins to tell Paul all about Holly's past, who she is, where she comes from, that Holly isn't her name. Her real name is Lula Mae Barnes. And he and Lula Mae married when Lula Mae was barely 14 years old. Doc tells Paul that he's there to take Holly home with him, to bring Lula Mae back to Texas. Paul agrees to Doc to try to help reunite the two of them. But Holly tells Paul that the marriage was annulled a long time ago. And Doc just needs to let her go and get over it. Move on. No ill will towards Doc. You know, it's not like he wasn't a nice man or anything. She just needs to move on with her life. And he needs to accept that and understand. The three of them arrive at a Greyhound station, thinking that Doc and Holly are going to go off together at this point. And Holly tells Doc that she's not coming. Sad, brokenhearted, but Doc understands, and he gets on the Greyhound to take off. After drinking at a club one night, Paul and Holly return to her apartment. And Holly just verbal diarrhea of the mouth. She begins to tell Paul her plans to marry Rusty from the party, you know, the ninth richest man in the world under 50. A few days go by, and Paul learns that one of his short stories is about to be published. So on his way to tell Holly the good news, he sees a newspaper which announces that Rusty's about to be married to someone else. So when Paul gives Holly the news, they decide they're going to spend the day together. And they're going to do all kinds of things that they've never done before, taking turns. So Holly's going to have to do something she's never done before, and then Paul's going to have to do something he's never done before. And then Holly, and then Paul, so on and so forth. One of the first things they do is they go to Tiffany's, because Paul has never been to Tiffany's, but Holly loves the place. And they have a limited budget. If I remember correctly, it's about $10 between the two of them inside of Tiffany's, which that's virtually impossible. But they end up finding something they can do in Tiffany's for $10 or less. And Paul has a ring that he had gotten from a box of Cracker Jacks engraved. After the day, Paul and Holly spend the night together. And when Paul wakes up in the morning, Holly's gone. Later that day, 2E shows up. And Paul ends their relationship. to he accepts because she's kind of suspected that Paul was in love with someone else. But with Rusty due to be married now, Holly turns her focus to Brazilian politician Jose. One day, Holly receives a telegram stating her brother Fred has passed away in a Jeep accident. She flips, she loses it, as one would if somebody close to them passed away, I'm sure. She destroys her apartment. Now a few months go by. And Paul's invited to dinner at Holly's apartment. Now Holly tells him that she's going to be leaving the following day to go to Brazil with Jose. Jose's flying from one place to Brazil. Holly's flying from New York to Brazil, and they're going to meet when they touch down. However, that day, Mr. Yunioshi has Holly and Paul arrested for being associated with Sally Tomato's drug ring. And Holly has to spend the night in jail. The next day, Holly's let out on bail. And Paul is there awaiting her arrival in a taxi cab. With him is her cat. Because she never wanted to give it a name because she didn't want to get attached to it. And a letter from Jose. And the letter basically tells Holly that he can't marry her now because of her arrest. Undeterred, Holly still has her mind made up. She's going to Brazil. She's worked too hard, too long. She figures she'll go there, and even if she doesn't marry Jose, she'll marry somebody else in Brazil. She asks the driver to pull over, and she lets the cat out in the rain. Just abandons the cat on the street. Paul is furious at Holly's actions, the way she's being. So he asks the driver to pull over, and he gets out of the car. He takes the ring that he had engraved at Tiffany's for her and tosses it at her. He storms off in the weather. Basically tells her that, she needs to check her priorities and get her life together. So he goes back to try and find the cat. After a few minutes, Holly puts the ring on and chases after Paul. After a little bit of looking, the two of them find the cat, taking shelter in an alley. Holly opens her jacket and puts the cat kind of underneath her jacket to try to keep it warm. And her and Paul kiss there in the rain next to the alley. This is one of those films that I didn't really know what to expect going into it. I've heard of Breakfast at Tiffany's. I know who Audrey Hepburn is, obviously. I've heard of the character Holly Golightly. But I didn't really know what to expect here. And it was good. Don't get me wrong. I did enjoy the story, and especially the performances of Audrey and Buddy Ebsen, of course, and George Pepper. I just had to look up the guy's name that played Paul again. I did very much enjoy their performances. I thought they did a great job. But I don't know if this film kind of lives up to the hype and legacy of it, in my opinion. Again, I'm not saying it's a bad film, but I don't see what makes it so great in so many people's eyes, if that makes sense. As a result, I am going to give this film 3 out of 5. I'm going to throw it in the middle of the pack because, like I said, I did enjoy it, and I did enjoy some of the performances. I just don't get the hype about it, personally. I do want to talk about Mickey Rooney's performance as Mr. Yuniyoshi. First of all, if I didn't know it was Mickey Rooney, I wouldn't have known it was Mickey Rooney. First and foremost. Secondly, his performance as Mr. Yuniyoshi was very uncomfortable. I mean, I'm not going to knock him as an actor. I think he did a tremendous job with what he was given, and the times were definitely different back then. But very, very over the top, stereotypical Japanese Asian character. And I bring this up because as we get into some of the Black History Month stuff, I know we're probably going to encounter some of this, stereotypical stereotypes, good, bad, indifferent. Just throwing that out there right now. But I haven't seen a call for this film to be banned, canceled, removed, like you hear about some of the films in which African American characters are stereotyped. And I kind of have a problem with that because I feel like if one stereotype is bad, definitely not saying it's good, but if one stereotype is bad but is allowed to stay, why can't another stereotype that is bad be okay? At the end of the day, none of them are good. Again, I want to make sure I get that perfectly clear. But if one isn't being called for cancellation and removal and banning, why the others? Something I want you to think about here as we move forward in our reviews for this month. Don't forget to get out there, get those hashtags trending, hashtag Casa D18 Studios, hashtag Renegades Reviews, hashtag Renegade Returns, and of course the ever popular hashtag Shenanigans. We interrupt this episode of Renegades Reviews for an important announcement about
merchandising.
Merchandising? What's that?
Merchandising. Come, I'll show you. Merchandising, where the real money's made.
Make sure you go over to teespring.com/stores/Jeff Meacham Network for all the t-shirts you see here from the West Coast professor, Jeff Meacham himself. You can get shirts for the Jeff Meacham Network, Talk Wrestling, as well as the Red, and gold Mania shirts. And while you're there, don't forget to get your shirts of the Casa D18 Studios Brotherhood, the Dads on Wrestling shirt, the Renegade JJ Williams, Statboy Sports Bar, and the hashtag StatboyApproved shirt. Make sure you go over to teespring.com/stores/Jeff Meacham Network and score your shirts today. Don't forget to get out there, do what the commercial just told you. Support the Casa D18 Studios Brotherhood. Get you your hashtag StatboyApproved shirt, Statboy Sports Bar, the Renegade JJ Williams, Dad's Not Always on Wrestling, Meachamania, Talk Wrestling, Wrestling Rewind, and the Jeff Meacham Network. All available up there right now on teespring.com/stores/Jeff Meacham Network. Support, support, support. Tomorrow, we begin our celebration of Black History Month here on the Casa D18 Studios channel and Renegades Reviews. And honestly, I could not think of a better way to start that celebration than with the 1977 miniseries, Roots. The story of one man's family tree. Alex Haley wrote the original novelization for which the miniseries was based off of, and it basically traces his family from Kunta Kinte, a boy in Africa, and his parents, all the way up to himself in America. So definitely going to want to tune into that one tomorrow. It's probably going to be a long one because Roots itself was either 6 or 8. I think it was originally 8 episodes on TV that was edited to 6 episodes for like DVD and video. But still, it's going to be a long one, an endurance test. So you're definitely going to want to tune in, check that one out. So until tomorrow on Renegades Reviews, right here on the Casa D18 Studios channel, when, like I said, we begin our celebration of Black History Month with 1977's Roots. I am the Renegade JJ Williams. Thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time.